I would like to introduce tonight's guests, Dr. Daniel Kalla and Madison Turk. Dr. Daniel Kalla is the internationally best-selling author of 11 novels, including Lost Immunity, The Last High, and We All Fall Down. His books have been translated in more than 10 languages, and he has appeared in national and international media regularly as medical expert and author. Dr. Kalla practices emergency medicine at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Madison Turk is an MD PhD student in her final year of her PhD in immunology, where her research focuses on cancer immunotherapy and how we can utilize some unique viruses to help stimulate a strong anti-tumor immune response. I'm really showing my scientific knowledge right now, aiding in our body's fight against cancer. And she has always had a passion for public outreach and loves to help people understand how the immune system works and the importance of vaccination. So without further ado, Dr. Kalla, Daniel, Madison, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that great introduction. And I'd just like to say that this is, I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I got the chance to read this book and absolutely loved it. So for anyone out there who hasn't read it yet, I highly recommend. And so maybe for those, there may be a few people online who haven't read it yet. Maybe we should just start with a little bit of a brief introduction about what the book is actually about. Did you want to do that, Daniel? Probably do it best.
I never do this very well, but I'll try. As I'm sure, Lost Immunity actually, ironically, it's a novel about vaccine and vaccine hesitancy and the anti-vax movement, and it's a thriller, but it's meant to be a thriller with a very important non-fictional and message. And ironically, I finished it on the day the first draft of it on the day I first heard about COVID. So it wasn't based on COVID, but COVID was included in the rewrite, and COVID just made it more relevant, not less relevant. But it's a thriller based on a simple concept that a new outbreak of a very deadly bacteria that's killing particularly young people hit Seattle after it hit Iceland about 6 months before. It's a kind of bacteria known as meningococcus, which is one of the great feared bacteria in medicine, like flesh-eating diseases, and this bacteria is spreading too quickly and kills kids too quickly for antibiotics to be fully effective. But there is a new experimental vaccine that was just about to be rolled out in Iceland. And the heroes, Lisa Dyer, the hero of the novel, the chief public health officer in Seattle, convinces the drug company to instead roll out their vaccine trial in Seattle, where it's more needed. And it rolls out swimmingly at first, but then a few of the recipients of the new vaccine start to get very sick and die. And, the anti-vax and vaccine hesitancy movement kind of rejoices to a degree at the proof that vaccines can be dangerous. But as it turns out, somebody is got their fingers on the scale. It's not science, but man that has made the vaccine go wrong, and somebody's sabotaging it for political and other reasons. And then the race goes on to figure out who's behind it and to stop the loss of faith in the vaccine. Because this novel is largely about what happens when people don't believe in a vaccine and when it's most needed. And so there are a heck of a lot of parallels to what's going on with COVID today.
Yeah, I definitely assumed that when I was reading it that you had started writing during the COVID pandemic. I was actually quite surprised to hear that this book was essentially written before, which also just goes to show how this has been an issue for a really long time. It's not a new problem. That we've always had this issue with people not necessarily trusting vaccines, although it's on a much larger scale nowadays than it was prior, and for some different reasons as well. So if it wasn't, so as we said, it wasn't based on COVID that you decided to write this book, what was actually the reason that you decided that vaccines was a good topic to write a novel on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously vaccines near and dear to your heart and your research, immunology.
Definitely.
So in my work in medicine, I've always made it a goal to write novels that have a strong non-fictional basis in important, ideally hot button medical topics. And vaccines and the anti-vax movement and the politicization of vaccines was becoming a big deal. And, ever since the mid 90s, basically, I mean, the anti-vax movement's been around 200 years, as we can get into, but it really took off steam over a very fraudulent study that was published in the 90s that completely incorrectly and fraudulently linked the measles vaccine to autism. And it really, it has spiraled out of control since. And it was a problem, we were starting to see a resurgence of diseases like measles that had effectively been wiped out in North America. But largely because of the anti-vax and vaccine hesitant movement, kids were starting to die of measles again. And so it had been, as I said, a very relevant topic before COVID, and one that I was worried about and wanted to get a message out about. And then it became 1,000 times more relevant after COVID hit us.
Yeah, it definitely came out at a really good time. Yeah, that one paper for sure had a huge impact on people not trusting vaccines. But the other one that I always kind of think about is how people just aren't necessarily scared of infectious disease anymore, and how they're like, why would I get vaccinated for measles? Who's had measles in the last 10 years or 20 years or whatnot? And I think if anything, with this pandemic that's occurring right now, it really brings to light the importance of the respect that we actually need to give microbes, viruses and bacteria alone, and really shows how well these medicines actually do to keep us able to live in these societies that we live in now, and how instrumental they are to our way of life. And hopefully, although a lot of people have kind of grasped that, we can kind of get the rest of the group on board eventually.
Yeah. Just to comment on that, Madison, I can't echo enough of what you're saying. People, assume these diseases are rare, and it's because of vaccines. I mean, there's no question of all the medical miracles, of all the life-extending medical advancements of the last 200 years. Vaccines are at the top of the list. Kids don't die anymore of all the things they used to die of. We don't see measles and polio and tetanus anymore, or we weren't, exclusively because of vaccines. So it made it easy for people to assume I don't need the vaccine anymore because it doesn't exist. Well, these viruses are resistant and recalcitrant and find a place to hide somewhere, and can always come back. So of course we needed the vaccine, and it was because of the vaccine these diseases were so rare. And now we're seeing what happens when people oppose and politicize a vaccine. That didn't happen with polio or measles or tetanus. People were thrilled. And let's face it, the quality control when the smallpox vaccine first came out 200 years ago, there was reason to be scared of the vaccine. There were lots of scary things that happened, but the quality control now of medicine and vaccine production is, exponentially safer and higher. And people don't seem to realize that. And we are truly, they call it a pandemic of the unvaccinated, but certainly when it comes to the deaths, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And, these people are killing themselves and they're killing their friends and neighbors. And, and I know that sounds dramatic, but it's not an understatement. And we would be dying of a whole bunch of other microorganisms if it wasn't for vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that that term, the pandemic of the unvaccinated, because I've heard it a few times now, and it seems to really resonate. The other one was the compassion fatigue. I can't remember where I heard that, but I also really like that, especially in frontline healthcare workers, when they see these people coming into the ER and they have severe COVID, and people are starting to really not be as sympathetic, especially when there was vaccines available to them for months now.
It's true, and to see, it's heartbreaking and also frustrating to see somebody begging for a vaccine when they're about to be put on the ventilator, and it's too late for the vaccine. It won't help at that point. And that story is told 1,000 times over. And, earlier today, I was speaking about this appearance on CBC in Calgary. And I mentioned, one of the absolute low points of this pandemic as a frontline healthcare worker was last summer. The very first person I put on a ventilator who had COVID was desperately ill, not that old, early 60s. And, and he was alone, and he was desperate for his wife to come in the room, but we couldn't let her because of the high viral load and the risk to her. And he was terrified as we put her on. And it was a very a very draining. Usually, putting someone on a ventilator is kind of exciting, and at least you feel like you're doing something. But there was a sadness about this, knowing how scared and alone he was. And I finished my shift that day, and I walked out onto Burrard Street, where my hospital is, and there was a march coming up the street of anti-maskers, who are largely the same group of people as anti-vaxxers. And one of them stopped and turned to me and saw me in my scrubs and screamed at me, "COVID is a hoax," And it was just, honestly, it was one of the most disheartening moments in my career to see, what everybody was going through. That there's so much evidence of the suffering and death, and people can still somehow believe in insane misinformation they read on some social media site. It's just, I don't even know how it occurs anymore, but it does.
Yeah, I've noticed to a way smaller degree, but of course it is always frustrating when people that know what you do for a living and know how much time and effort you've put into, researching, and for me, researching these types of things, and even getting into doing some COVID research myself, but especially for you frontline workers to have to see what this virus actually does to people and be with them in those really difficult moments. And again, like you said, to have people not take it seriously is beyond disheartening. So
well, you're actually in the field of research. I certainly am not. I'm a clinician. I'm not an expert per se. I'm definitely not an expert in vaccines, but I know the experts in vaccines and I respect them. And I just don't understand this. Nobody questions a structural engineer who builds a bridge and says, "My uncle on Twitter knows better than him. I'm not taking that bridge." Nobody questions their pilot. Why do people feel they have the right to question these lifelong scientists and epidemiologists and public health care experts and be so much more right than what these very intelligent, very educated people have spent their life researching? I don't even understand where that delusion comes from, but it's prevalent.
Yeah, I think about that a lot in terms of how, scientists might be portrayed in the media, how I see it a little bit more for scientists than doctors, but it depends. Or, like movies, often you see the mad scientist, or you have people portrayed one way, even just for drama. But if that's all people are exposed to, maybe that's how they feel. Like, it's tough to say, which actually kind of brings me to one of my questions I had about your novel. So reading it, the pharmaceutical company gets painted in a little bit of a negative light. And just in the sense of, they ended up covering up some stuff or what here and there. And my question was, knowing that you wrote this novel before this pandemic, is there anything about the novel that you would have changed the way that you wrote it now, knowing how relevant it would actually be? And do you think that, even having a little bit of negativity towards these things gives a bigger impact?
That's a great question. No, I mean, I actually think the pharmaceutical companies, for the most part, have been relatively altruistic and good throughout COVID. I mean, they've been sharing their research, which they never do. They've done some stuff that isn't financially motivated. Like, I think Pfizer, has done some incredible good for the world, and Moderna, which is a new company, and even Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, they've all tried. And so I have a lot of respect for that. But, there's still money-making corporations. And I also have a healthy distrust for major pharmaceutical companies. Not a healthy distrust, but I know at the end of the day that many of them and most of them do care a lot about their patients, but they also they're all private companies and they want to make money. So, I have some healthy skepticism about big pharma, and so I don't regret including some of that. I don't think they come across as the full-on villains in this case.
No.
But yeah, so there's that. But yeah, your other question, in retrospect, when I was doing this, I wanted to be very respectful for the vaccine hesitant, who I still am to a degree, the anti-vaxxers, to try to understand. Many of them were well-intentioned people who had unfortunate illness in the family that they, what I think is quite wrongly, associate with vaccines. But I wanted to understand where they were coming from and not vilify them. And I did that. And in retrospect, I think I treated them too gently. I mean, because, like you said, measles and such were rare diseases, and it was okay to be skeptical of vaccines. But we have incredible, overwhelming evidence of the safety and effectiveness of these new vaccines and the life-saving ability of them. And to just disregard it all because you have this religious like belief in anti-vax, and not look at the numbers and look at the fact that all the people dying are the ones, for the most part, unvaccinated, except some very unfortunate few who are most vulnerable, who are dying because of the unvaccinated. Like, look at the data, just look at the billion of people who have been immunized versus the ones who haven't. It's so easy to do. And so I've lost a ton of respect for many of the people that I was willing to give a pass and try to understand that. So if I was doing it, I would be harder on the anti-vax movement than I am in this novel.
Yeah, fair enough. I did notice that I liked the way that you did show a lot of compassion to where the anti-vax hesitant, or the vaccine hesitant, as you would refer to them in the novel, come from. And I think, like, I like to take that stance or that direction myself, particularly with discussing vaccination as well, because of course, for a lot of times people have real hesitant or real concerns, sure, and you don't want to downplay those concerns. But it gets to the point where if I can have a rebut for all the concerns that you have with science and explain to you why you shouldn't be concerned, and you still are very much saying, well, no, that's not, like, you know, if like I can talk to you with logic and I can't sway you, then at that point, I don't really understand anymore. So that's where I start to get really frustrated, is I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anybody who's actually respects my knowledge and wants to hear what I have to say. I have more than enough time for those people. But I've had multiple conversations myself throughout this pandemic with people who are arguing with me, and I know that I'm 6 years into a PhD in immunology, and they have absolutely I don't even know if they're past high school. And, you know, you're just like, why don't you think that I know what I'm talking about right now? And it is kind of sad that this is where we're at, where we have all the knowledge you could ever want right in front of you, but we choose to pick out the pieces that suit our narrative. And I wonder what you think about social media, actually. You can, that'll be my next question.
No, but I want to pick up on the thread because you make some really important points here. There are intelligent people who are, very intelligent, educated people who are skeptical or worried about, potential medical side effects. And early on, it made a lot of sense. And they had legitimate questions, people with allergies and stuff. And have those discussions. But we're beyond that. I mean, we've proven that it's safe. There's 1 in a million people who really can't take this vaccine, but it's safe. But these whole personal freedoms, and argument, personal freedoms don't guarantee your ability to be antisocial, right? You can't take just because you want the freedom to have a bomb, it doesn't mean you can carry it into an auditorium. I know that's again a dramatic example. But I have no time for vaccines have been mandated and legalized and for hundreds of years. It's just part of our society. You can't send your kid to school without, a series of vaccines. And that argument makes me insane. But to your question about social media, and it's great that people get engaged and stuff, but the problem with social media is it so often becomes an echo chamber for people, and they get the information, and more commonly when it comes to the vaccine, the misinformation that they want to see, as you said, and it just validates these wrong, uninformed, uneducated, and quite frankly, incredibly selfish positions.
Yeah, so a lot of the people that I know, and I really appreciated when people did this throughout the pandemic, when they found an article that they were a little bit nervous about, they would send it to me and said, what do you think of this? Should I be worried? And I would read the article and I would send whatever my comments back and just say, you know what? No, this isn't a real article. And for this and this and this reason, like, thank you for sending it to me, but no, don't worry about it. That kind of stuff. But a lot of these are posted on social media. They're posted on, I'm of the generation where Instagram seems to be the most common. But are you on any of these platforms? And do you find that there's certain ones that are better at, or do you find more misinformation on certain ones? And do you think that there should be more scientists and doctors? Because I know that I have noticed you're on Twitter, on these platforms to try to even the scales between real information and not real information. So it's kind of a mouthful there.
No, it's a good question. Yes, I'm on all, at least Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm probably most active on Facebook. I have to promote my book somehow, and I do like to engage with people.
Yeah.
It's great that way, and catch up with friends, but I don't get my scientific knowledge. I don't, when I want legal advice, I don't get it from some legal chat room in Facebook. I don't think these sites were ever meant to disseminate this kind of authoritative information that many of these sites pretend to disseminate. People don't, as you know, reading scientific research, same way I wouldn't try to pick up a text in Japanese and read it and assume I could understand them. There's nuances and stuff to reading and understanding scientific journals, and they're easy to misinterpret and misunderstand. And so it's how the data is presented. If I was writing a novel about the social media platforms, they would very much be the villains of my book. They're trying a little bit harder to categorize and capture misinformation, but they don't seem to be trying that hard to me. I don't think it's in their vested interest to prevent the misinformation from being spread. So I'm super skeptical of them, even though I use them and benefits from them.
Yeah, I wish that there was a little bit more regulation about the types of things that can be posted, because again, it's much too easy to post something that has absolutely no fact involved. And we've all done it, read a post and went, oh wow, like I can't believe that. And sometimes it takes a lot for someone to sit there and think, okay, like maybe that's not true. And as a scientist, that's how you're trained to think. But not everyone's trained to think that way. And we can't assume that everyone's going to sit there and think, okay, that doesn't sound quite right. Maybe I should find, a peer-reviewed source.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I can totally, mea culpa. I posted this, what I thought was a beautiful quote from George Carlin about life and the importance of it. And then some wrote and said, George Carlin never said that. And they sent me the actual source it was a minister who had given it in one of his sermons 10 years before. I never thought twice. I just read it because I don't check the sourcing. But nobody's going to die because they thought that George Carlin said something instead of some minister. So you're not accurate, as accurate in that place. But, when it comes to health information, stuff that affects, yourself and your family and each other, it damn well should be accurate, right?
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that a lot of what I've realized over the last, 18 months or so is that a lot of scientists and a lot of doctors aren't the types of people to really express their feelings online. So they're not the ones that are always heard. And that maybe there should be a few more people on there promoting some of this real data and explaining it to people in a way that is easily digestible. So essentially getting better at science communication. And of course, like writing novels is a brilliant way of science communicating. And so thank you for doing that. And again, everyone should read this book because it does a really good job of explaining how important vaccines are. And I like the way that you used a pathogen that has a little bit more of like a timely consequence, where COVID, people are like, oh, well, some people get it and they don't feel anything, and some people get really sick, and it's really hard to convince people that you just don't know which side of that you're going to end up on. You might be asymptomatic, or you might be on a ventilator. You don't know. And it's one of the craziest viruses that we've dealt with, where the predictions we can't really predict, which is not common.
It's breaking all the rules. Yeah, no, absolutely. First of all, back to your original point, for the most part, scientists make terrible spokesmen. We all went to school with, you're an exception, Madison, you're articulate and you can get, but we all remember the science nerds and stuff in our class. They're not the people that you want to be getting, watching on your late night TV or watching video feeds of. They're just, and often they're, as brilliant as they are, they're often not good at conveying simple concepts in a way the rest of us can understand, or we don't get lost in the jargon and the high level stuff. So, there are some really good scientists. I think Sanjay Gupta on CNN is an excellent at breaking it down. And there's Canadian examples too of, some of the, but I don't know why they don't publish more stark details. Like every night when we see the COVID numbers, why don't we see the numbers in ICU who are vaccinated and not vaccinated? Why don't we see how many have died with and without the vaccine? Because I think people would be shocked who didn't realize that, the ones who are most sick, as I've said before, but it's worth repeating, are almost exclusively the unvaccinated, and,
Yeah.
and the rare exception are people who tend to have serious comorbidities or just terrible, terrible luck. Because the whole thing, because people are so worked up about breakthrough infections. Yeah, breakthrough infections happen, but for most people who are vaccinated, a breakthrough infection is just a bad cold, right? It's just so rare for a fully vaccinated person to end up in hospital or ICU.
I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I have always kind of had a bit of an issue with the way that the media portrays or at least communicates about these infections and saying, oh, like so-and-so who's double vaccinated just tested positive for COVID-19, or, and they tend to like really draw that point. And you're just like, well, how are they doing? What are their symptoms like? Like, how is so there, it's vaccines are not a silver bullet. You're never going to get 100% immunity. It's all going to depend on the person, and you don't know exactly how each individual will respond. But as long as we get herd immunity, then all those people that may be only at 70%, and where some might be at 90, at least we can protect each other that way. But like you said, they need to start really showing who is doing worse. What are the demographics of these people? Yes, double vaccinated people can get sick, but how sick are they getting? Like, really, I know that someone showed me a picture, again, social media, but sometimes it works for good. And I don't know whether this was real or not, but a picture of a lung that was taken of a double vaccinated person with COVID versus someone who was unvaccinated, and just the immune infiltration and edema and everything that you would see, the difference in the pathology that's what people need to realize, is it does not protect you 100% from the virus, but it will protect you from being that one sitting on a ventilator.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And I think that's a point worth repeating. And anybody who's listening should know, I mean, there is no 100% foolproof vaccine. There's some that are close. Measles vaccine is pretty close. The COVID vaccine has outperformed any hope or dream or expectation of how it would perform it. Basically 95% effective keeping people out of hospital. But herd immunity, this concept that's bounced around, people get that idea confused. You need, because of the fact that nothing is foolproof, you need almost everybody to have some form of immunity to eventually break the chain of transmission. So even if this vaccine is not 100% effective at preventing somebody from getting infected or even spreading it themselves, if it's 90% effective and you get 90% of the population inoculated, eventually the virus runs out of hosts and it can't get between the 10 people that's blocking it to the one susceptible person, and eventually it just dies out, right? But until we get to that level of herd immunity, which is at least 70% of the population fully immune to the virus, it's probably in this case closer to 80 or 90%, will never prevent the spread of COVID.
Yeah. And I know that here in Alberta, they kind of went with the strategy of, we're going to have to start living with it eventually. I know we had some restrictions that we ended up going back on, which was probably for the best. But essentially, my personal feeling is that we've had the vaccine and for a while now, and I never really contemplated that we'd still be going through this fourth wave to the level that we are right now, just based on the fact that I just assumed that once the vaccines came out, everyone would get them, we'd be going back to normal. And I have a hard time feeling like the unvaccinated aren't to blame for the fact that we're going through this now fourth wave, and now we're back in masks again, and now we're getting this resurgence of the Delta and all that. And again, I think that's sort of my version, I guess, of compassion fatigue, where I'm less I kind of feel like there's someone who I can point a finger at this point, because in my opinion, it should be gone. It should be over. I shouldn't have to worry about wearing a mask next to my colleagues at work.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's so sad to see the way this virus and the vaccine is tearing families apart. And, I know people not talking to relatives and not talking to friends and it's so unnecessary. It never needed to be controversial. It never, and I don't know how else that we can get the message and what more people need. I mean, I know we're just kind of beating a dead horse right now, even in this conversation, but
On that note, I was willing to or wanting to ask you, um, has there been some type of analogy or anecdote or something that you found to be the most successful in creating, like that kind of light bulb moment for somebody who you're trying to educate about vaccination? So if they were hesitant at first, doesn't even need to be the COVID one, but just in terms of why do I need to get vaccinated? I hear this a lot. I'm a healthy person. Why do I need to get vaccinated? Is there anything that like has kind of worked for you in that sense, where you really just like gotten through to anybody?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've certainly answered that question a lot. It's an easy question to answer. I mean, it's for yourself, because you might be that. I mean, I read about a 42-year-old. I've read about so many athletes dying of COVID, in their 30s and 40s. There's still a 1% plus fatality rate, not to mention long COVID and all the complications you can get. That it doesn't kill you. But on top of it, how would you like to be the one that killed your mother or your grandmother or because you let yourself get infected and let yourself be a vessel of, think of it as nuclear waste. Would you allow yourself to carry nuclear waste in your pocket and go somewhere else and spread that radiation? It just, as I said, at this point, it really strikes me as a very selfish. And that viewpoint is particularly selfish. I mean, there are things, we all pay taxes for the benefit of society, not for the benefit. I'm not getting my own financial benefit out of paying a tax. It's the same way with vaccination. There's a personal benefit, but the much larger benefit is for the whole society at large.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a significant amount of people that have a hard time seeing it that way. And maybe that's partially because it's never really been marketed that way. Vaccines, again, like personally, before I started learning about vaccination, any kind of depth, I had no idea that they were a population strategy. I would always assume that it's a personal choice, and it's, if I want to get myself vaccinated, I'm protecting myself. And I think it really was this pandemic that sort of brought it to light in a broader sense that they're a population strategy, and they work the best when everyone has them. And so I think hopefully if we get anything out of this, that people will realize that for all vaccination from here on out, that they're not just the individual medicine, and it's not necessarily about what's best for you, that it is kind of an altruistic concept. And we just have to hope that people will see the benefit in that altruism and at least hopefully try to learn and ask questions and get all the information that they need to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about the novel. So I was curious about the characters. So you have, again, some pretty strong vaccine hesitant characters. You have some very strong pro-vaccine, or as you call science, pro-science kind of characters in there. Do you base your characters off of people in your life, or do you people that you've encountered? Where do you kind of get the inspiration? Because they're very well developed and very convincing. So I'm just curious as to whether it's where they come from.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm sure subconsciously, everybody I know influences my characters, but in the few times when I've tried to base characters off real people I know, it's been a disaster. They become caricatures, and I'll tell you one anecdote. It's not really about characters, but so much about names. When my first novel came out, Pandemic, as it happens. First novel. I don't always write about infectious threats. It's my third book about one, or fourth maybe. But my publisher immediately changed one of the names of the characters because the first two letters sounded too much like the heroes' characters, and people get confused. Apparently, when they're reading, they associate the first letter or two of a name with the actual name. So I changed it to some rarer name, and it happened to be a name of one of our nurse managers who was kind of our grumpier, but very funny and very intelligent, but grumpy nurse manager. And I remember, and this character was not a hero or a villain, was kind of a mid-level FBI, not very likable. She was kind of an obstructive character. And I walked in to the one night shift about 15 years ago, and then she's just, this nurse is glaring at me, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I read your book." I said, "Oh, you didn't like it?" She goes, she goes, "You wrote a character based on me." I said, "No, I didn't." She goes, "Yeah, you did. And you made her an unlikable bitch who never gets laid." And I was like, she was obviously partly joking, but people are very proprietary about names, and people recognize themselves if you try to use too much, But as you said, back to this novel, the hero comes from a very alternative family, as you know, and her own dad is fiercely anti-vax, and her sister is probably better described as vaccine hesitant. And and especially when her favorite niece, she doesn't have children of her own. So when her niece is at risk and she so desperately wants to get her niece vaccinated, it leads to a ton of tension in the family, which is, I really wanted to make that point that vaccines, tear people apart. I didn't realize till COVID came just how extreme it could be, but it gave me a great chance to dramatize this very important point about people's strong beliefs and how it can affect their personal relationship.
Yeah, I really like that part of the novel, just in the sense that, of course, that's happening all over the place today, and too many times have I heard anecdotes of how people are tense between loved ones because of viewpoints on that type of stuff. But I also really liked how the sister character, who starts off very hesitant, but is also willing to come around and be open-minded and kind of listen to what Lisa is saying, and even the way that it was at the end, it was, not only am I open to this one, but I might even consider getting the other one. And so it was nice to kind of show that character arc of someone who, just because you're hesitant doesn't mean that you can't be persuaded, or you're willing to, and you want to learn more, and all you need is someone to kind of help you through that. So, which is, I think, a lot of people right now. And again, I'm more than happy to talk with those people, and I'd love to be the person that sways someone into the pro-vaccine category. So
no, and and one of my personal favorite characters writing this book was Angela, who's the mentor and former boss of the hero. She used to have the same role, and she's dying, unfortunately, of cancer in this book, but she's still very involved in the outbreak, and and very cynical, and hopefully one of the funnier characters in the book. But she has no time, and it's very no nonsense. And the line that I came up with, which I've quoted since, but that I just thought, I imagined, I've never had this conversation, but would be funny, is she said, "I'd love to see how resistant an anti-vaxxer is if they were bitten by a rabid bat." Like, which show me someone who got bitten by a bat that likely had rabies, which is 100% fatal disease, would still refuse the vaccine at that point, But and I think the same logic applies to all vaccines, to it, certainly to things like COVID anyway.
Yeah, as soon as if it's preventative, and even if the risk is small, you always think, well, what are my chances? What are my chances if I ever get it, whatnot? But yeah, when you're faced with, you have it, well, would you take the vaccine then? And yeah, the unfortunate part is it takes weeks for your body to develop an immune response to something, and you can't take it as an after the fact. It has to be before. You have to give your body a chance to actually develop the immunity it needs to fight something off. And I think that a lot of people see the minor risk of vaccination, as minor as it is, still too much of a risk. And I think that there needs to be a way to kind of put things into perspective in terms of, well, like the minor risks of the vaccine, if you do get COVID, those same risks are just absolutely amplified. And yeah, so I did like Angela's character a lot, just the way that she was kind of on her, she was sick and she just didn't have time for it anymore. She was like, she was unapologetically herself. And I really like those people in real life. So I really enjoyed her, her character in the novel as well. I thought that she brought a lot to the story.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thank you to Dr. Daniel Calla, to Madison Turk for their fantastic conversation on his book, Lost Immunity and Other COVID-related Things. Daniel, Madison, do you have anything that you would like to plug before we end the program?
Well, I'd like to thank you and Hamza behind the scene, especially Madison, for facilitating such a great conversation, and also to support, I think it's amazing that libraries are a fundamental part of fabric of our society, and I think it's great that we can support them and have conversations like this. And so I encourage people to be strong advocates for the libraries, to be the first sign of the decline of civilization if we ever lost those.
I do appreciate those kind words. Madison, do you have any?
Just pretty much the same thing. I've been using the library my whole life and continue to use it. And thank you for putting on a really great program. I had so much fun being able to talk to Daniel about his book. And again, really, really enjoyed it. So I was very excited to hear some of his opinions. And again, can't wait to read the next one.